Sifter for the ear.
News, interviews, reviews, cinema, TV, streaming. Action.
Hi y'all, this is Jerry Williams, aka TV Jerry. We got some more summer movie events coming up. New Habit Cinema is sponsoring the Good for Her film series with a free screening of Bodies, Bodies, Bodies on June 20th at 8 p.m. at Star Hill Beer Hall. I'll have a link on the webpage for this show at tvjerry.com. Movies in the Outfield at the Diamond takes place on Friday, June 21st at 7 p.m. They'll be hosting the popular Pixar film Cars. Bring a blanket or pillow and $10 a person. Here's a free one at the Ashland Theater on June 23rd. Raymer Productions' latest release, A Shared Secret, was written and directed by Bobby Mercer. Doors open at 11 a.m. with a screening at noon. There is some foul language, violence, and it may not be suitable for young children.
You have a brief period of time when you're behind the red carpet where you can kind of wander a little bit and look and see people on the red carpet, and then you're kind of ushered through into the stairwell that feeds up to the theater.
That was Paul Serwitz talking about getting into the Oscars, but not on the red carpet. This podcast continues my interview with Paul, who made his career as a film buyer, 25 years for Regal Cinemas, and most recently president and COO of Landmark Cinemas. This time we'll talk about theatrical windows, the 4 audience quadrants, how movies are publicized now, why horror movies open every weekend, day and date releasing, and more on attending the Oscars. By the way, the film Firebrand, which is now playing with Jude Law as Henry VIII, was another of his distribution consultancies. Sifter Review of the Week. The Great Lillian Hall on Max. Jessica Lange has the title role as a legendary Broadway actor. While in rehearsals, she starts to have memory issues, which leads to one of today's most popular subjects, dementia. The production centers around the New York theater scene. It was actually shot in Atlanta, but it's primarily a vehicle for Lange to act, in all caps, and act she does. While she has several masterful moments, after a while the endless opportunities for her to emote get tedious. She's surrounded by an excellent supporting cast, most notably Kathy Bates as her assistant. Basically, this is a one-note drama that keeps banging on that one note. Even so, Lange's dynamic and sometimes moving performance grounds the film. By the way, this film is loosely based on the life of theater legend Marion Seldes, who was the aunt of the screenwriter. I gave The Great Lillian Hall 2.5 out of 5 stars. So, Paul Serwitz, we ended the first part of this interview talking about the effect of COVID and the strikes on the movie market. What do you see coming for the rest of this year and beyond?
I think the back half of this year is going to see a really strong uptick, and the momentum will be built over the last 3 or 4 months of the year into 2025 will be really strong, and that the next 2 years are going to be very good and closer to what pre-COVID normalcy looked like than ever before.
That would be great. It's interesting to me because it seems like every damn weekend another horror movie opens.
Yeah.
Is that because they're just pretty much a guaranteed somebody's going to go see it, even if they're terrible?
Yeah, the horror genre has been a real stalwart through post-COVID and the labor strike period. There's a built-in audience for that kind of film. They don't all work, but they're popular. They play to a young audience who are often frequent moviegoers. And it's just a genre that tends to be more stable and consistent than most others. I mean, you compare that to rom-coms, for example, which have really struggled to recover in the post-COVID world with streaming, the impact of streaming. Thank goodness, the horror genre movies are as consistent and well-attended as they are. And there are a lot of, and they're going to keep coming.
Yeah. The last question I usually like to ask everybody is, what are you watching? But I know you go to movies all the time. Is there anything that you have seen lately that you maybe had a sneak preview said, this is going to be a monster, or something that you're watching on the streaming if you're allowed to do that?
A few weeks ago, I went to CinemaCon, which is our industry's biggest convention of the year, and it's heavily supported by the studios who put on these presentations and show clips and trailers, many of which have not been seen by the public yet, for upcoming film over the rest of this year and into next year. And as it usually is, the studio presentations this year were very impressive. In particular, Disney and Warner Brothers really have a lineup of film content over the next 12 months or so that's impressive. In the near future, Disney Inside Out 2, despite being a sequel, looks like as good a movie as the original Inside Out was. And that's part of what made Pixar such a strong producer of animated content. Obviously, Disney's also got the Deadpool Wolverine movie in late July, which is expected to be the biggest movie of the summer.
Wow.
And we saw about 15 minutes of that. It was absolutely gut-wrenching hilarious. But all the studios had impressive reels of content and a lot of it. That's why, everybody left CinemaCon with a lot of enthusiasm and positivity about and encouragement about what the rest of the year is going to bring. The fourth quarter, the holiday season at Thanksgiving and Christmas looks really strong this year, especially compared to last year. Wicked looks like a big movie, 4 quadrants that'll play to everybody.
I've seen that trailer 3 times already. And like all the musicals, nobody sings in the trailer.
Right.
You hear a little music, but everybody knows Wicked's a musical, but they never sing in the trailers. And I guess it's been proven people don't want to see that.
There's been a lot of successful and commercial musicals out there in the last decade or 15 years, but there is a perception that a lot of people are not interested in musicals. And a really good example of how studios market films was recently this past fall and into the early winter on Wonka. Warner Brothers designed a marketing campaign for Wonka that really avoided making it look like the musical that it actually was.
Right.
People saw it and enjoyed it, which is often the case. And that generates good word of mouth, good reviews. And it wound up being a very commercial, very leggy movie that, had a strong multiple off its opening and wound up being a $200 million movie.
Now, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you mentioned 4 quadrants. Why don't you explain what that is for the audience?
When people refer to a 4-quadrant movie, what the industry's talking about is male and female over and under 25 years old. So all of the advanced release tracking that various companies do to try to project movies' performance and how they'll open basically breaks demographics down into male and female. So it's by gender, and then by age group, limited to under and over 25 years old. So 4-quadrant refers to both male and female, over and under 25 years old. And in a more general sense, 4-quadrant to the layman would indicate all ages, 8 to 80, or other terminology might be used to describe a very broad appeal movie.
Yeah. So, for example, what we just talked about, horror films, that would definitely be in the under and probably more female than male.
Depends on the horror movie. Almost all horror genre movies are much stronger under 25, certainly
Sure.
under 35, no question about it. But male-female often depends on the content itself. Some movies skew more female, depending on the nature of the storyline or the characters in the movie. Some are more male. Often the more grisly, gory, violent movies tend to skew more male, but that does vary on gender lines.
Yeah. So we talked about COVID before and how that affected the whole industry. What about distribution itself? How have the models changed in the last couple of years?
The easy answer to that is that on one hand, it hasn't changed a great deal when it comes to straight ahead, commercial, mainstream, wide release film. That's pretty much as it was. A big movie or a big wide release is going to normally be in 3,000 to 4,000 theaters. What has changed, and which this is what affects a lot of the smaller indie players and the art house operators and circuits like the one I used to be with, Landmark, is indie distribution, art house distribution has changed a lot post-COVID. And the days of smaller indie movies opening in New York and LA on a very limited basis, they call that platform releasing.
Right.
When it'll open a couple or a few cities and then over the next several weeks fan out into more markets and more theaters, even if it stays in a relatively limited release pattern. That type of distribution is really few and far between these days. And good examples of those movies are movies like Poor Things last holiday season and The Holdovers and American Fiction, 3 very successful award-winning, Oscar-nominated movies from last award season that fortunately really found a strong, more discerning audience, first in limited release, but then expanded out. But what's happened now in most independent distribution is that those kinds of movies now expand on a much quicker basis. And that's problematic for art house operators because art houses around the country and circuits like Landmark are specifically built to succeed with movies that are in limited release and aren't playing at a theater near you
Right.
everywhere around in a market.
Right.
And there's a lot less of that nowadays, making it much more challenging for those kinds of operators to succeed. Because now, even if they have any kind of exclusive or very limited window, it's a week or maybe two. And then it's at multiple of theaters in the market. And those theaters are now competing with, big multiplexes down the street or,
Right.
a few miles away. And some of that's due to streaming and the fact that the window for those movies to go from theatrical to a streaming model is now shorter than it used to be. Instead of being, 75, 90, 120 days, now it's 30, 45 days in many cases. And distributors need to get their theatrical in and completed quicker. And a lot of the movies in the indie world tend to be leggy. And they'll be in theaters for weeks and weeks because they operate at a lower level and people go see them. They don't rush out the first week or two to see them. And that's become more challenging for those kinds of movies and those kinds of theaters.
I know that back in the old days, maybe only 20 years ago, a movie would play X number of weeks at a theater, and then they would have that rollout where they say, okay, then it's going to go to DVDs, and then it's going to go maybe to premium cable, and then it's going to go to regular cable.
That's right.
All that's out the window now, right?
Yeah, it's a different stream now. You've got theatrical, and of course, during COVID and the early post-COVID days, there was a whole lot of experimentation done with what's called day and date releasing, meaning movies were available theatrically and at home through streaming services simultaneously. That was a model that does not work.
And I'm sure everybody in the theaters hated it.
It's a death knell for the theatrical business.
Right.
And it didn't last long because even the studios realized that the previous model of going theatrically first with a significant theatrical marketing campaign is the way to maximize any movie's revenue stream because it sets up everything else downstream. It sets up coverage, publicity, press, water cooler talk, momentum, cultural attention that movies on streaming alone don't have. No matter how big they might be on Netflix, nobody talks about The Gray Man that was on Netflix and was one of their biggest movies of all time. They talk about movies that had a big theatrical presence and a big theatrical marketing campaign. And when they go to streaming, there's a much greater awareness. They perform better even in streaming models. So all that experimentation came and went. And now we're back to a predominantly theatrical exclusive distribution model, even though that window is shorter. The typical window now is 45 days, 30 to 45 days. But despite the fact that that's a lot less than the 75 to 90-day model previously, the fact of the matter is the data has shown everybody for years that the vast majority of the theatrical revenue driven by a movie is done in the first 30 days of its theatrical release. Everything after that's pretty much gravy, with few exceptions that really run, like a Top Gun or a Spider-Man, that really run in theaters for months. The new windows being shorter isn't per se problematic for a theatrical success, but it is shorter in terms of movies going to the next downstream levels, which starts with streaming, electronic playthrough, pay-per-view or PVOD, they call it in some cases, and then eventually free streaming, which is when cable the existing cable platforms also come in.
You mentioned marketing. I know it used to be, you'd see big newspaper ads and you see lots of TV commercials. Well, nobody watches TV and the newspapers have almost disappeared. How are people marketing now? Where's it showing up? Is it all social?
There's a lot of social media. I will say that you're right. Print advertising outside of awards season in New York and LA and key cities is really pretty ineffective and something that's more than not gone by the wayside. However, the major studios in particular still spend a lot of money on TV. You'll see ads on big sporting events, highly rated TV programming, whatever that may be. There's still a lot of TV being bought because even though people time shift on watching TV and tend to zip through commercials, people still will stop and watch movie ads. But there is a whole new world it's not that new. It's been going on for several years now, but a whole new world of digital social media based advertising. And the best example of that is a independent distributor called A24 based out of New York, who have become hands down the most successful indie distributor in the business over the last several years. I mean, so much so that there's a younger audience out there that knows the name A24. They've actually branded themselves in a very strong way.
Footnote.
Some of A24's best-known films are Swiss Army Man, Room, The Lighthouse, Lady Bird, and Everything Everywhere All at Once.
They've never been a big TV buyer, conventional marketing methodology company. They really use their resources and spend their money on digital, social media, and all kinds of grassroots types of marketing that obviously works because they have been enormously successful. The kind of content they're known for, it's often well reviewed, well received by their audiences, which in turn promotes tremendous word of mouth. And that, that's been the single most effective form of marketing in time eternal. That's how word really gets out and awareness is created on a high level these days.
I know, like stars of movies and stuff will be on TikTok or one of those services promoting it themselves. So yeah, I've seen some of that too.
In a lot of our trade publications, there's often narrative devoted to certain stars' followings, their Instagram followings, their TikTok followings, and it's in the millions and millions of followers. And that's a huge part of how those movies are marketed.
Something that has been discussed a lot lately, I want to see what you think about it. Mr. Spielberg was very vocal about it. The superhero movie. They're obviously still box office. Do you think they're starting to wane?
This has been the subject of, interesting discussion and, conversation points for years. The consistency and the level of success of the superhero genre has been truly remarkable. It's been 15 years of unadulterated high level of success in the superhero world, particularly Marvel, but DC has been successful and the rate of success has been remarkable. And I think it's pretty clear that over the last few years there has been some level of fatigue, and it's just out of volume. It's out of the sheer volume of those kinds of movies and the complexity with which the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Cinematic Universe have developed as these characters and movies relate to one another and stories, go off on tangents. And it's like having to do homework to keep up with the storylines and the plot twists and so on. For a lot of people, that's a thing. They love it. They stay with it. But for the general moviegoer, there has been some fatigue. And what that has resulted in is some consumers and moviegoers getting more selective. A result of that, a lot of people have seen Disney and Bob Iger reconsider how they're going to go forward in developing and producing and ultimately releasing superhero movies. There's going to be more of a focus on quality and a little less focus on quantity so that they can try to develop or redevelop these movies into more of an event that they used to be, as opposed to being as often as they become.
Right.
And I think you may see some success in that, but I think it's the natural progression.
Right.
No genre, no type of film is immune to the novelty or the shine dulling some over time with quantity. It's the nature of anything that's popular. Right. I think there'll be some success, but the trend's not going to reverse entirely. It's not going to become what it was 10 years ago when every superhero movie, it seemed, that was released was gigantic.
Do you see any other trend coming up? Obviously, you said rom-coms are kind of gone.
I think rom-coms are slowly and very incrementally making a bit of a comeback, and I think they'll get there, but I think with that is going to be the requirement that they are good and smart and people like them. I mean, you had a movie...
The Glenn Powell movie.
Footnote.
That Glenn Powell movie was Anyone But You, and I'll have a link to my review on the website for the show at tvjerry.com.
The Glenn Powell movie, Last Christmas, which was very modest in its opening and its performance over the holiday stretch, wound up having an incredibly strong multiplier of its opening and legs, as they call them, wound up being an $80 million movie, which for a movie like that in today's marketplace is an incredible success. It became that lengthy long-running movie because people liked it. word of mouth was good amongst its core audience, and it just stayed in theaters for weeks and weeks and weeks.
And Glenn Powell.
Yeah, he's become a big player.
That made him. Yeah, that made his.
That's right. Going back to what I mentioned a little bit ago about American Fiction, Holdovers, and Poor Things, these were all movies that inherently had a limited demographic appeal.
Right.
But they were all very successful in their own right relative to those kinds of movies. And that was a very encouraging thing to see happen all in the same period of time, that all three movies were reviewed well, received well, were leggy, got the awards attention they deserved. And, those are successful domestic grosses for movies like that. And I think it's important and an indicator that those kinds of movies can still succeed in today's theatrical marketplace if they're made and distributed and marketed, and that it's not all about streaming.
Right. Have you ever had a chance to go to the Oscars?
I've been once. Ironically, it was in February of 2020, right before COVID. I was fortunate enough to be offered a couple of tickets by one of the independent distributors who had the seats. Bev and I went and, were able to check that one off the bucket list. It was a really fun experience.
Where were you seated? Way up in the balcony somewhere?
Oh, yeah. We were up in the mezzanine, so we spent as much time looking at the monitors as we did the stage. I will say that having been as fun as it was, and the energy is incredible, if you can't be seated either on the orchestra level or at the front of a mezzanine level, I just assume watch it on television.
Uh-huh. Does everybody, you hear about this, the whole thing and meeting somebody in the bathroom and stuff. Do they have different bathrooms for all those people sitting in the front? They're the nominees and then everybody else goes to the other ones? Or is there an opportunity you could run into Emma Stone? Well, you couldn't, but Bev could run into Emma Stone.
It's a mixed bag. The front, especially the front half of the orchestra section, which is all filmmakers and stars.
Right.
They exit out the sides, and there are restrooms and bars and things like that out there that are restricted for people from those sections. They use seat fillers to put people in those seats,
right,
so that if they're not back by the time the TV feed is back, there's people in the seats. But, beyond that, you do run into and see recognizable people, actors, actresses, filmmakers that might be wandering around elsewhere in the Dolby Theater.
You don't get to walk the red carpet, do you?
No, the security and all of that around entering the Oscars is super tight. And there's two different areas that feed the Dolby Theater off of Hollywood Boulevard. One is the red carpet that is highly restricted, of course.
Right.
And then behind it, when you watch the Oscars and you watch the red carpet, you'll see an area behind the red carpet, usually behind some like curtains that are thin and sort of sheer. You can see people passing along in the entrance area behind the red carpet that's cordoned off by a wall. And that's where all the peons like me go when you enter to the Oscars. So they don't let you stand around and watch either. You've got to keep the line moving. It's a lot of people entering the theater. So you have a brief period of time when you're behind the red carpet where you can kind of wander a little bit and look and see people on the red carpet. And then you're kind of ushered through into the stairwell that feeds up to the theater.
So what goes on during the commercials?
They'll have somebody on the stage just talking to the audience and, making a joke here and there, talking about what's going to happen next. And, it's
now, this is not the host. This is just like somebody else that just is filling.
These are producers and people that are managing the telecast.
Oh, okay. Right.
It's very matter-of-factly.
It's like they say, now in this next segment, so-and-so is going to do this and be prepared for this or that kind of thing.
Yeah. We'll be back in, 60 seconds. And there'll be some downtime where really nothing's going on. Nobody's speaking. There's just kind of a hum and a buzz in the audience because people are chatting and whatever. And then they give you the 60-second mark before the telecast is back on, and they count it down from there to make sure the audience is back in their seats and quiet, and boom, back on the televised.
Most important question, did Bev get a new dress?
Let's see.
You can't even remember. You men.
She did not get a new dress. She wore something she had that she had never worn and needed the right event to wear it to, and that was it. We've been lucky enough in the 22 years we've been in Los Angeles to go to a lot of events, whether they be premieres or big charity events, the American Cinematheque, and it's at those events actually that you run into more stars than you do at the Oscars, because they're out and around. They're at the parties.
Right.
They're at, the dinners, they're commiserating with people at the bars. And those are really the fun events.
All right. Well, Paul, this has been fascinating. I think we have a two-parter here.
Yeah, a sequel.
There you go. There'll be a Paul Serwitz and Paul Serwitz the sequel. Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's always great to run into you. Of course, the audience doesn't know this, but we catch up regularly on the phone, talk about movies ad nauseum, and then we run into each other on vacations from time to time, and it's always been fun to see.
We do.
Yes,
That's
we do.
Right. It's a long-standing friendship, and I'm glad to have it.
There you go. Me too. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Jerry.
That was Paul Serwitz, who made his career as a film buyer, 25 years for Regal Cinemas, and most recently, president and COO of Landmark Theaters. He's currently consulting on distribution for films with roadside attractions, including Firebrand, which just dropped in theaters.
Coming soon. In theaters.
The Bike Riders. The Vandals are a dangerous motorcycle club, and a love affair presents problems, with Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, and Jodie Comer. The Exorcism. This variation on the theme takes an insider look as an actor starts to get weird while shooting a horror film, starring Russell Crowe and Sam Worthington. Thelma. Jane Squibb has the title role as a 93-year-old who gets duped by a phone scammer and sets out to get her revenge.
TV and streaming.
Land of Women on Apple. After her hubby's legal issues, Eva Longoria takes her mother and daughter to Spain to start a new life. Orphan Black Echoes on AMC+. This spin-off from Orphan Black takes place 30 years after the original, in the same universe where adult Kira and a scientist try to help a woman with memory loss. I Am Celine Dion on Prime Video. This doc about the famed singer delves into her battle with stiff person syndrome. Tiger Warning on Netflix. Jessica Alba plays a special forces officer who takes over her granddad's bar only to have trouble with a local gang, also with Anthony Michael Hall. My Lady Jane on Prime. Lady Jane Grey is promised to be married, but she falls for a handsome stranger in this period comedy with a modern edge. The Bear returns for his third season on Hulu. Since Remembering Gene Wilder has just dropped on Netflix and is already popular, next week we'll remember the podcast I did with the producer and the director of the documentary. This is Jerry Williams. Thanks for listening.
For more Sister, including literally thousands of reviews,
Visit tvjerry.com.
That's a wrap.